July 22nd, 2020 edition of the Urban League Jobs Network Digital Career Success Series. I'm your host, Kenneth L. Johnson, president of the Harlem, New York-based diversity recruitment firm, East Coast Executives. If you've seen my recent post on social media, you understand that I'm extremely excited about having our guest, Gisselle Ruiz, on the show today, the art of negotiation. Yes, I believe the topic is an important one, as many of us begin the process of re-entering our workplaces, or some of us adjust to the situation at hand, working from home. But many of you have reached out to share that this is a needed topic because you actually are in search of new employment opportunities for whatever reasons, some COVID related and some personal. Either way, you've expressed your desire and deserve a salary adjustment. The art of negotiation is indeed about salary negotiation, but our guest today brings so much more to the conversation. I know this because I've had the pleasure of sharing the stage with her for a recent Circle of Change Leadership Conference panel discussion hosted by Dr. Josh Fredenberg. The topic that day was about career success strategies, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Gisselle shared openly about her career journey and how she's managed to craft a stellar career, NBC, Disney, Google, Facebook, TikTok, simply by understanding her unique value proposition. She dropped many gems that day, trust me. I could go on, but I won't. I'll let her share her own amazing story. Gisselle, welcome to the National Urban League Digital Career Success Series. So glad to meet you. How are you, my friend?
Thank you. I'm excellent, my brother. Thank you. Thank you, Ken, for having me. Thank you to the National Urban League. I'm really excited to have this conversation. To be honest, most of my conversations really are, and we've talked about this, really sort of couched in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so this is one of the first times that I'm going to focus very specifically on this topic. And as I was preparing for this conversation, realized that I definitely do have some gems, some insider tips to share, just as someone who's been on both sides as a candidate as well as an employer, giving out offers and negotiating many salary and compensation packages. So ready to get into it whenever y'all are.
Yeah, I thought that was great. I think that's the piece, right? You've been on both sides of it, and you've openly shared, even with me in conversations, about what that looks like, not only as a woman of color, right? But just as someone who's navigated the tech space that hasn't been friendly to people of color, but just someone who understands the importance of getting what you deserve. So I'm going to let you jump in and do your thing. I'll come in if we have some questions. Our audience here has been great with putting questions in the Q&A and in the chat. So myself and Theveline Felix on the back end, we'll work hard to get those questions curated. And at the end of your presentation, we'll share them with you and bounce them around.
Perfect. I also just want to lead that, if I don't cover everything in this time that we have together, I am fully accessible. My contact information will be shared. I sort of pride myself on making sure that I follow up with everyone and anyone. It may not be in, your timeline, but I certainly am more than available to have, one-off conversations that are more specific to your particular situation. So know that is definitely something that I love doing and am available to do so. So yeah, we can go into the first slide. See, hopefully.
There we go.
Perfect. Awesome. So I think it would be helpful to sort of start with my journey, because a lot of this has been my personal experience that has led me to sort of feel like I'm finally at the point in my career where I understand what I bring to the table, my market value, what I'm going to contribute, what an organization is getting when they decide to offer me an opportunity to join their team. And it's taken a lot of peaks and valleys and roller coasters, again, on both sides of the journey, to be able to stand here today, almost 20 years deep into my career, to be able to really articulate that. And the reason why that's important is because I think for a lot of us, especially if you come from underserved, marginalized, disenfranchised communities, you aren't taught these skills. You sort of learn them along the way, and you tend to learn them not when it's too late, but a little bit further along than others and potentially your peers that you've gone to school with or that you've worked with, right? Your colleagues. And I know that for me was the case. I definitely did not start even thinking about negotiating my salary until maybe 4 or 5 years ago, probably even less than that. I think when I went to Google was probably the first time that I, had that back and forth interaction and conversation about what would be the most appropriate for myself, right? And even though I've done this on the other side for, for again, almost 2 decades, where I've made offers and I've negotiated compensation packages for many, many, many candidates to join the various organizations that I've had the honor and privilege to be a part of, it still doesn't mean that I know how to best do that for myself, right? And so I think it's important to understand the context of that and to unpack a little bit of why that is. So I'm a first generation American. My mother immigrated to the United States from the Dominican Republic when she was 8.5 months pregnant with me. No education, till this day, still doesn't speak the language. First in our family to come to the United States and leave her entire family behind in a different, developing nation and country. And so, I grew up in New York City primarily, and then, we transitioned to Boston because New York in the 80s and 90s, as we all know, was a little rough. But I sort of grew up being an adult at a very early age, like paying rent and bills and translating things for my mother because she was a single mom. She didn't speak the language, which is obviously a handicap in our nation, and having to really grow up very quickly around all things that had to do with adulting. I was the first in my family to go to college. I'm the first in my family to have a master's degree. I hope with God's will and grace, I'll be the first in my family to get a PhD. And those things are incredibly important to me, not just because they're accolades and accomplishments, because they're able to really articulate what my mother, with her sacrifice and really fortitude and foresight in immigrating to a new country, has been able to do in one generation that has implications for the remainder of my life, my children's life, my grandchildren's life, so forth and so on. And so much of this conversation is going to be about us understanding our value, but also understanding that economic empowerment is really what we should be focused on as we're growing our communities in terms of our professions, right? What you are negotiating is not just how much money you're making, it is how much, what type of home you're gonna be able to buy, what type of city you're gonna be able to work in, what type of education you're gonna be able to provide your children. It is bigger and broader than just that one conversation around how much money you're making. And we definitely need to make sure that we're keeping that top of mind, because the only way we're going to be able to shift the tides and really tip the scales around all of the major pay inequities that we all are aware of, especially when it comes to people of color and when it comes to women, and then the intersectionality of women of color, and other underrepresented groups, is because we don't have the tools that are built into us early on. These are not topics that we're talking about at our dinner table with our parents. We're not all necessarily well-versed or equipped to then go into an organization and really have a conversation about what your value is and what an appropriate salary, compensation, or benefits package should look like. And for me, that has been because historically, the home that I grew up in just did not have that context to sort of prepare me for that when I went to college, and furthermore, when I went into the professional setting. I started my career in higher education. So, I started in college admissions, which I loved. I spent the first 5 years of my career doing recruitment, multicultural recruitment and international recruitment. I got to travel the world. I believe that education is our one and only equalizer in this society. So I'm very committed to sort of education, and specifically public education. I've worked in education reform. My master's degree is in education. So that will certainly always be home for me. But I got an opportunity to transition to corporate America, you know, about 5 years into my professional career. And that was a whole nother arena because I had never worked in corporate America. I had only worked in colleges and universities and sort of higher education institutions. And so I wasn't prepared to really, again, leverage myself as I was transitioning into the professional sector or the private sector. So that definitely has certainly had implications that if you're in a similar situation and making an industry transition, also want to be mindful of how you go into those conversations for your salary negotiations and conversations. In addition, at this point, I've mentioned a couple of times that I've been sort of doing what I do for a very long time. I feel really blessed and privileged to have built a career right at the nexus of the things that are most important to me. And so I've always worked in a global talent acquisition, so recruitment, capacity, and diversity, equity, and inclusion, and sort of marrying those two, the intersection of both, helping systems, organizations, companies understand the value add of members that are not from a white dominant, predominant culture, that are not from necessarily top institutions or funnels from other major organizations, but creating access and opening doors for all people to have the opportunities to work at some of these major organizations. And I've had the opportunity to do that in the education sector. I spent a decade doing that in the entertainment and media sector. I then transitioned to the tech industry where I did have the opportunity to work for 2 major tech giants and now 3, because TikTok is where I currently am employed. And, you know, and that to me is really the intersection. TikTok to me is the intersection of entertainment and technology. And so it gives me the opportunity to leverage my skill sets and my experience. But all of that is helpful context because I've had the opportunity to sort of have salary and compensation conversations in 3 different industries. And those things do matter. Industry matters, right? Understanding that market, understanding that industry as you go into these conversations is also going to be really, really important as you prepare to move forward in considering an opportunity. And furthermore, as Ken sort of mentioned, you know, I sort of call it like, it's not really an accomplishment. It's more like, I feel like I've been in the witness protection program because I've had, you know, the opportunity to work at 10 different organizations throughout my career, which is a lot. It means I've had to start over 10 different times. I've had to learn new companies, new culture, new process, infrastructure. It's been really challenging and they all have not been great experiences. I wish I could say that, but I can sit now and sort of look back at like the holistic overview of what that has been and all the different lessons that I've learned in terms of, you know, lots of things, but very specific to this conversation, making sure that I am able to articulate, right, market myself and my brand in terms of what I bring to a company. In addition to that, I think it's also taught me, like, don't ever attach yourself. This isn't my quote, so I don't want to steal it. I like to give people credit. You know, I saw this on Instagram where someone said, don't ever attach yourself to an institution, a person, a place, right? Instead, a mission, a calling, a purpose, and stay really grounded in that. So I always say, like, I don't like to lead with my title. I like to lead with my work and my brand, because TikTok is just the vessel by which I'm doing what I do. But what I do with my friends, I do at church, I do in personal settings, professional settings. It is me first and foremost, and I lead with that. And then I get to choose the organizations that I want to be associated with, but that doesn't change my mission, my calling, my purpose. And I just found that really resonated with me, because I think it's important as you are exploring new opportunities, especially right now in such a vulnerable time where you might feel like, I just got to get a job, I just got to get in the door, that you do not forget what you bring to the table and what your value add is, and that you stay grounded in that and make sure that the organization that you're aligning yourself to really suits and is in alignment with your particular personal pursuit and brand and the things that are really important to you. And then be okay with saying, if it's not, And understand that as you're going through an interview process and as you're considering an opportunity, that is a mutual decision. I always say to my candidates, before we end this phone call, we're going to make a mutual decision about whether or not this is an opportunity that you are interested in exploring and that we feel we want to move forward with. And I use that language very specifically because I want the candidate to understand from our initial conversation that this isn't about just us choosing you, it's also you choosing us. And I think that when you're going through an interview process, well, I know that when you're going through an interview process and when you're especially at the negotiating and salary table, that is the attitude that I would implore all of us to really keep in mind as we have those conversations. So it's also been mentioned a couple of times that, you know, the reason why I think it's important to have this conversation or why I'm helpful, and I don't ever consider myself a subject matter expert, but more a practitioner, but I have had the opportunity to sort of be on both sides of the table. So I think I can give you perspectives from being a candidate as well as an employer that has, you know, again, gone out and hired a multitude of people and had many conversations as it relates to salary and compensation.
I still view you as a subject matter expert.
I'm working on it. I'm working on it. Ken, I'll stop there if you want to jump into anything in particular. If not, we could keep rolling. There's definitely a lot more content where we could do a deeper dive.
Yeah, no. Let's do a deeper dive. You know, it's interesting. I see that we have some talent acquisition professionals on the platform today. I see Geraldine Lynn checking in. So I'm excited that we have some people that are really already engaged and they're throwing questions our way as you're speaking. So let's go, let's dive in.
I love it. All right, next slide. Okay, so there's a lot of data and research on all things salary related, all things salary negotiation, and even more specifically, the inequities and the pay gaps that are out there, and just a lot of data around what some of these companies are starting to do to really address some of these challenges. So I provided some resources at the end around some articles, some HBR articles and others that really talk about this ideology that companies are starting to think about adopting, which is this idea of let's just be more transparent, right? We all know that like we're told that like salaries are hush hush, you're not supposed to talk about them with your peers or colleagues or anyone else. And I feel like no one ever questions the why, like why? Like, why is that a thing? And the reason why that's a thing is because that means that you more than likely are being paid on how well you showed up to that negotiating table, not in terms of how much you deserve to be compensated based on the scope of the role, your skill set, experience, and background. And that means that the person next to you doing the same exact job with the same or less of a skill set might be getting paid more than you because they were just better at negotiating their package. And that is what essentially companies don't want you to know, or recruiters don't want you to know. So again, I encourage you after this conversation to definitely do a deep dive on your own and do some research. I've added a couple of resources, but that just scratches the surface. But I wanted to highlight two particular quotes that really resonate with me around this topic. So white women in the US on average earn 79% of what white men make. Black women earn 63% of what white men make. Native American women bring in 57%, and Hispanic Latina women bring in 54%. So this is according to a 2018 report from the American Association of University Women. And of course, those statistics have been sort of dissected and probably increased, you know, now that we're 2 years later. But it's just profound to really see the numbers and the disparity that really happens for a multitude of reasons in terms of how we are compensated despite our skill set, despite our contributions, despite our what the scope of the job is. The other thing I want to interject here is that another conversation that's happening around this, which I think is really interesting, is, you know, most people of color are pretty active in their professional communities. And so therefore y'all are leading, you know, Black associations, Latino associations, veteran associations, all kind of employee resource groups, all kind of business groups, affinity groups, interest groups, you know, being used as the token to sort of like build out projects and have conversations beyond the scope of your work, and then not being compensated for it. It's like you have two jobs in the same company, but you're only being paid for one. So there's a lot of conversation happening right now around that as well, right? Are these roles that should be compensated? Are these you know, things that are contributing enough to our community and our company, where when we do performance reviews and we increase salary, or we give bonuses, or we give equity, that we're taking all of those things into consideration as part of an employee's performance, and not just considering it like, oh, an extracurricular, nice to do thing that they're doing on the side. So definitely urge you to sort of dig deeper into that trending topic. And then just to go to the other quote as well. So why do disadvantaged groups see higher pay offers when employers don't use salary history information? Simply put, that information gives employers a bargaining advantage. Knowing that a job applicant is currently underpaid, employers can offer a bit more than their current pay level, confident that the applicant will accept. But the applicant may still be paid less than they are worth. In this way, pay inequalities are perpetuated. But when access to salary histories is limited, Black and female job applicants see a more level playing field. So all of that is to say, don't get got. I'm gonna say that. You wouldn't go in and purchase, you know, a vehicle and then just buy it for sticker price, right? And if you are, then that's a different conversation. Everything in all aspects of our life is open for negotiation. That recruiter's job is to get you as close to potentially the lowest part of that band that they need to, and it is not their job to advocate for you. It is your job to advocate for yourself. And so you want to be really mindful of giving up your power, giving up your bargaining tools, sharing more information than you realize you need to, especially because you don't have to. You, by law, actually, in a lot of states, they're not even allowed to ask you what your actual salary is or provide proof of it. But we're so quick to just be like, yeah, have all my numbers. Here's my pay stubs, my W-2s. Get access to all my business, because you're so focused on getting that job and not realizing that what you're doing is really shifting away and taking away your power to be compensated in the appropriate way based on your skill set and your background, and frankly, the scope of the role. We could keep pushing to the next slide. So I've broken this down into two different parts of the conversation. So the rules of engagement, which is really the courtship period. So this is when I was talking about, this is a mutual conversation. This isn't you just interviewing for them. You're also interviewing them as well. All of these things that happen, you know, pre actual offer stage, that I think are important things that folks to be aware of. So one of the things that I always encourage everyone, including myself, is you want to explore all opportunities always. I don't care if you absolutely love your job. I don't care if you have zero plans to go anywhere for the next 5 to 10 years. If you are not out there understanding your value, understanding the market, understanding what folks are being compensated for to do your type of work, then you are misinformed and therefore are probably going to be continued to be underpaid. Because employers traditionally are not known for coming up to you and saying, hey, you've been here 10 years, so now we're gonna increase your salary by 30% because you stayed here. Most of the time, most of us have to leave our organizations to increase our compensation. And that's another leverage and tool that if you start exploring other opportunities elsewhere, even if you don't go, it does not mean that you have to take that other job. It just means you should always be sharp and be ready and prepared for that next potential move, whether it's lateral or a promotion. You should be building relationships with recruiters and different networks. works. You should be thinking about exploring other industries. You should always be interviewing because that way you're prepared. By the way, if you ultimately decide that you don't want to leave your company, that's just going to reinforce that that's where you want to be. But it gives you leverage internally to be able to then say, hey, listen, I understand what the landscape is, and I understand what the work that I do, how it translates in other industries, and what the compensation is current state, and we should have a conversation about that, because I do want to stay here and I am committed to this organization or institution, but I want to make sure that there's parity with what this role is and what my experience is in comparison to outside of this organization. So definitely encourage you to always explore other opportunities. And I skipped around a little bit, but that's helpful sort of context for me to sort of initiate the rules of engagement. The other piece is that, you know, conversations that happen during your interview process, during your offer process. So during your interview process, you should not be having offer conversations. During your interview process, if a recruiter says, well, what are your salary expectations? Your response is, I'd feel more comfortable not sharing that information. What are you able to share in terms of what your compensation is for this particular job? Are you able to share the band, right? What's the minimum, what's the maximum? Are you able to share, you know, the last time you hired someone into this position, if this is a backfill or a new position, what that compensation package looked like? Put it back on them. And if they feel the need to corner you, which does happen, with an absolute minimum, then you give them just that. Hey, I really am very interested in learning more about this opportunity, exploring this opportunity, potentially going through this interview process. In terms of compensation, I am open, I am flexible. I would love to cross that bridge when we get there at the offer stage. At minimum, what I'm able to share with you now is that for me to consider this opportunity, I would need X. And that X, by the way, should always be like 30% higher than what it is. And not 30% higher, like make up some random number, but that is really couched in some data, some metrics, some research, and you understanding your market to make sure that it's not a number that is not realistic. But that is how I would advise you to have the conversation about compensation during an interview process. And then the conversation that you have about compensation during an offer process is a completely different conversation. But I do not want you all to get stuck from jump, right, out the gate, locked into, oh, I can get this person for $60,000 less than what I'm, you know, able to offer them. Because you've given up your power and shared too much information early on. That leads me to talking about law and compliance. So know your rights. Every state has different laws, legalities around a salary and compensation conversation. So know what is applicable to you. Like I said, in some states, they have to, by law, share the actual compensation. In the state of California, it is a new law. Most companies are now getting up to speed. They have to share with you the compensation. They have to share with you the band. We are a very employee versus employer friendly state. Other states, you know, New York, I know, has some really strong standpoints around this as well. So just familiarize yourself with, you know, law and compliance, and know what the company has to share, and then what you should or should not share, or what the expectation is around that. If you have any recruiter friends, if you know anybody that works in, you know, a staffing agency or a headhunter, I hate that word, I don't know why we still use it. Someone like Kenneth, for example, has a great resource, and people on his team that have market intel, that know these laws and compliance procedures. Definitely leverage them to make sure that you're in alignment before you go into these conversations. We talked a little bit about the need to leave to increase compensation, and that's a real thing, right? Most of the time, you grow the most when you step out. You grow very slowly internally, 2.5%, 3%. You know, and it's all based on your performance, and then your bonus is based on the company's performance. So if they don't do well, and we're in COVID, so no one's doing well, then you might lose your bonus. all kinds of things that really can impact your growth, both laterally and as you're promoted internally. When you step out of that organization, even if you're making a lateral move, boom, you instantly are going to have, at minimum, probably a 20% hike in your compensation. And it's unfortunate that it works that way. It's unfortunate that sort of like corporate America has designed these systems that they'd rather not invest in you while you're there, and someone else can come and snatch you up. But that's the world that we're living in, and I just want you to be aware of that, so that if you decide to stay at your institution, you can leverage that information to go and advocate for yourself internally. And then if they're not willing to meet you where they should, then that gives you the heads up that it's time to potentially bounce and start thinking about some new opportunities. And all of those conversations are really, really embedded in knowing your worth and your market value. I do not want any of you having emotional conversations about this. I don't want you having personal conversations about this. This is business. This is a business discussion. You are a brand. You are an entity, right? What you bring to the table is of value, but you need to know what that is, and you need to know how that translates in the market. You need to take your titles out of it, because titles don't necessarily translate, position to position, company to company. So you need to peel away the specifics of your work based on where you work, but truly understand what your entire package is. Who are you as an employee? Who are you as a professional outside of those titles? And then be able to understand how that translates across other industries and various markets, both locally, regionally, globally, if that's important to you, and have all of that information in your toolkit to then be able to drive really meaningful, deliberate, intentional conversations that are not about like, I should get paid more money because I just feel like I'm working hard. Like, that's not going to work for anybody. And that's emotional and personal. And that's for your friends and your family, not when you show up to your employer to really be able to advocate, to really be able to show a value proposition, to really be able to show some data and some metrics of like, here were my OKRs, here were my KPIs. This is what I accomplished in the last quarter or in the last year. And because of that, this is why I know and I believe that my compensation should be reconsidered for A, B, or C. And you come at them with that dissertation talk, right? Prepared, versus just something really general that is couched in how you feel. So that, again, in the next point is really about just doing your homework internally, doing your homework externally, doing your homework across the board, doing your research, so that you're armed with the appropriate resources to be able to have these conversations. And then I always say, ask the right questions. Again, especially in the courtship sort of interview phase, it's important for you to ask questions around, when you guys make compensation decisions or leveling decisions, what are the things that come into mind, right? What you don't know is that in the background, the job, for example, might be considered, a high individual contributor, but for the right person, they might be willing to make that a leadership role. Right? And that makes a difference. Those levels make a difference. Those bands make a difference because they contribute to the decision around what your compensation is going to be, as well as your potential growth and professional development in that organization. So make sure you're having conversations around, when you make hiring decisions, when you're making compensation decisions, are you making those decisions based on like my skill set, my years of experience, the industry I've worked in, the companies I've worked in, the institutions that I have attended, or is it the scope of the role? Meaning, whether you hire me with 10 years of experience or someone else with 15 years of experience or someone else with 6 years of experience, would we be all paid the same exact amount, regardless of what we're bringing to the table, because we're going to be doing the same job? Those are two different things, and those are conversations that you should be having both definitely in the courtship stage, but also during the offer stage, because that does determine a lot of where you ultimately land if you end up with an offer to consider and then ultimately deciding to join the company. And then I always say, do not be afraid to push. If they come to you and they want to continue interviewing you and subsequently make you an offer, and we can go to the next slide on this, then they want you, right? They want you. And so therefore, they're going to do what it takes to get you. So do not be afraid that if you push, that means that company is going to be like, you know what, forget it. We rescind the offer. We don't appreciate you not, accepting this gift that we gave you. This ain't no gift. Salary is not a gift. Compensation is not a gift. You are coming to me with an offer to compensate me for my services and my brand. I am not a not-for-profit. You are not doing me any favors. And let's just get that straight, right? So do not be afraid to stand up for yourself. The worst thing that can happen in an offer negotiation that you lose, right? If you lose in that offer negotiation, the worst thing that can happen is that your original offer still stands. Whatever they came at the gate with still stands. And at minimum, you have the job at that. But what mostly happens is you get more. Simply by just advocating for yourself, you get more. I don't have the specific data. It's very anecdotal. I'm sure it's out there. But from my personal experience on both sides of the coin, you get more by simply saying, you know what? I am really interested in this opportunity. I really want to join this team. I appreciate you putting this compensation package together for me. I will take the opportunity to review and circle back. But what I can tell you is that just based on what I'm seeing right now, I don't believe this is going to work for me. So I want to be able to prepare, for our next conversation, something that I think would be more suitable in order for us to close this deal. Right? You'll hear a lot of recruiters also use that language. What's it going to take for us to close this deal? Or, how does this feel for us to start? There's just a lot of lingo that we use, that we're trained to use, to be able, to get you to say yes as quickly as possible from gate with the first offer that we come to you. We've always got more in our back pocket. Remember that. Most organizations, I can't speak for all, tend to have more in their back pocket. If they say to you, like, this is the best we can do, challenge that. Challenge that. Always challenge it. Do not ever just accept an offer, especially in the first conversation. I don't care if they're offering you $100,000 more than your current job. Do not accept. Do not accept in the first conversation. You take that, you ask for some paperwork, you read it, you discuss it with, your significant others, important people in your life, and you always circle back with, let's discuss this a little bit further. So they don't want you, don't be afraid. The bands versus categories is sort of when I spoke about, like, are they hiring you for what you bring to the table, your years of experience, your skill set, your pedigree, your background, or are they hiring you and making a compensation decision based just on the scope of the role? Meaning, regardless of all of those things, we're going to pay you based on the job, and everybody who's in that job or similar job and similar level will be compensated accordingly based on that. Right? You want to know where you are on that. That's sort of the next line too, right? So paid on your skill set or the role. Talking points in that conversation is individual contributor versus manager. Am I going to have a regional scope or a global scope? What level is this particular role? A lot of companies will say, we can't share our levels. Okay, great. Maybe you can't tell me the particular level, but you can at least tell me what the competencies are under the level that you're considering me for, or what the competencies are for the level of this role. And then they can speak to you a little bit more in particular about that. The other thing, and honestly, I think this is the most important piece of this, is like, when we think about negotiating salaries or when we think about compensation, we only think about the money. What am I bringing home out of my paycheck? And compensation benefit packages are a lot broader than that. And what you'll find is, if you start thinking about it that way, you'll realize that sometimes all of the other benefits outweigh what you're actually bringing home, right? Because if they're doing a 401k matching at 60 to 70%, to the first 20% of your paycheck, that's a lot of money going towards your retirement that maybe isn't going on your paycheck, and that's tax-free. If they're providing you with 20 to 25 days of vacation versus 10, for some of you, that's going to be more important than what you're taking home in your paycheck. So I ask you to think about compensation broadly, more holistically, and then know that everything is up for negotiation. Maybe they can't increase your salary. Fine. You can't give me an extra 5, 10, 15K on the cash. What about vacation time? What about my benefits? What about my relocation? What about my stock and equity? What about my sign-on bonus? Hey, by the way, I have a current bonus coming up in 2 months at my company, and you want me to leave now to start at your company in 2 weeks. That means I'm going to miss out on that bonus that I've worked at for the past year to be able to get. How are you going to take care of me on that so I don't lose that money, right? Negotiating start dates. If you need more time, whether it's to wrap things up at work, whether it's to go visit family, whether it's to reset and take a vacation, that is negotiable. Relocation, bonus, remote work, especially right now. It might not be full-time remote eventually once COVID is over, but if it's important for you to have 1 or 2 days a week where you work remotely, that's negotiable. What hours you're going to work is negotiable, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So don't focus just so much on the money or the salary. Don't focus just on the equity. Don't focus just on the bonus. Think about holistically your entire compensation and bring that to the table for this conversation. Always ask for time to review, always set a specific time to circle back, and know that this does not have to be just a one-time conversation. I've gone back and forth 3, 4, 5 times with candidates, right? Because usually what the recruiter is not the decision maker, right? So the recruiter is going to go and say, let me see what I can do. And then they're going to go back to their people. They'll sort of come together and see what they can do. And then they'll come back to you with another potential offer. And you'll say, okay, well, let me review that. Let's talk through that. Let's discuss this. And then, I agree with this, or I'd want to change this. And then they go back and then you do it again, right? So don't be afraid of a little back and forth. And again, don't be scared that you're going to lose the job because of it. Definitely be humble, be open, be thankful, be grateful that, that this is a potentially mutual relationship that you guys are going to engage in. But don't be afraid to have multiple conversations around this. And then I'll end with one more thing and then give it back to Ken and we can go into questions and this is like an ethos that I stand behind every single time that I have to negotiate for myself. You only get to negotiate your salary once. Once you are in that organization, that's it. You're on a track, and that track is a very slow build for your next increase. It's a slow build for equity. It's a slow build for increase in salary. It's a slow build for promotion. That's just the reality. So if you go into an organization where you're already at an inequity, where you're already underpaid, where you didn't negotiate your value, then the climb to where you should be is going to take probably 2 to 3 years minimum, even if you're knocking it out of the park in terms of your performance. But if you come in where you should be and where you want to be and where you're proud to be and you're excited to join an organization because you feel like, yes, I finally am able to go into a place that sees what I bring to the table, then you are much more positioned to be able to contribute to that organization and to be able to grow your career there. How's that, Ken?
Amazing. Listen, you put me in attendee mode. I'm like sitting here taking notes. I love it. I love it. Listen, speaking of notes and attendees, the Q&A is on fire right now. So we're going to jump into some of that. But some of the things that you touched on that really caught my attention, everyone operating as a business of one or as a brand, right? Bringing that to the conversation. Everything is negotiable. And also to think broadly, right? To think broadly about where you deserve to be salary-wise. So listen, let's jump into the questions real quick. Honestly, you covered a lot of this, but I think we might need to revisit on some. So I'm just going to go down the line and jump in. So here we go. First question, Chandra wants to know, oh, you know what? Here, let me jump here. So in the middle of COVID-19, Should applicants be more flexible? I am finding that a lot of companies are referencing this economic downturn as a reason to offer less than attractive offers. What are your thoughts on that?
No.
No, I'm with you right there. I'm with you.
Don't let people take advantage of you because of the circumstances of our situation. I get it. We all need jobs. I am so incredibly blessed to have an amazing job. I'm incredibly blessed to work at a company that's growing exponentially in the middle of an economic downturn and global pandemic. So I hear you, and I don't take it lightly that we do need to be flexible, right? Because being gainfully employed is primary. But that does not mean that I'm going to cower to an organization that is going to use that as a crutch or as an excuse. If they're hiring, if they still have that job open, then that means they have the money to pay you. Sure. If they don't have the money to pay you, then they wouldn't be hiring. Now, where you can be more flexible is you're going to find a lot more opportunities that are for like contractor roles instead of full-time positions, right? Those are things that I think you should consider. Can I go into an organization and maybe it's not a full-time job because they don't have the headcount approval, the budget for an entire full-time position right now, but I can come in as a contractor. I can be compensated appropriately. I can join the company, knock it out of the park, and then when they are ready to convert people into full-time employees, I'm already here and I'm already doing the work. So I definitely would encourage that.
Okay. Also, now here's the question from Chandra. When filling out an online application and they ask you for your salary expectations, what should you enter?
Competitive.
I love it. I love it. All right, competitive. Here, we're going to keep them going. I'm sitting on at least 20 plus.
Let's do it, yeah. Competitive, NA, anything but a number. If it asks you for a number, put a 0. I mean, a million, I don't care. Just don't give them any intel.
So Gisselle, how reliable are salary ranges reported on websites like Glassdoor, et cetera?
I think it depends, right? A lot of that intel, if you can get it on LinkedIn, and I'm on LinkedIn all day, but I'm not well versed enough if they provide that market data, but I would think that they do. There's also just like governmental labor sites that you can check as well, that keep track of this information. And then the other sites like Glassdoor, I would say take with a grain of salt, but they are helpful resources because most of that information they're getting from actual employees or former employees.
Gotcha.
So I wouldn't take it as like the end all be all, but I do think it's sort of helpful for context along with other resources.
Okay, another question here. Can we ask employers to share historical data which shows the pay scales within their organization for the position you are interviewing for?
Okay, that's next level. I like where this person's going. That's intense. That's probably a little too much, especially at an interview stage. A lot of that information is really privatized. Companies are only going to give you what they have to give you. So they're not going to want to share that information, which is why I say you need to be armed with what the laws are in your communities and in your states, because then you want to make sure that they're in compliance, right? So like I said, the new California law, that's new. Most employers in California are not adhering to that or are not aware of that. So they're probably not, but they're not going to just self-disclose. They're not going to show you their hand in a poker game, right? So they're not just going to self-disclose it. But if you come to them and say, hey, my understanding is that this new law 54782, whatever it is, in the state of California mandates that all employers share their bands during an interview process, then that recruiter is going to do one or two things. One, I'm not familiar with that law. Let me circle back and get back to you. Because once you start talking like an attorney, people freak out in all the right ways. Or two, they're going to say, yeah, you know what? I am aware of that and let me share the information. So, I think back to that question, it's probably going to be hard to get that much sort of like privatized information, but you can at minimum get what the company where they operate and the state that they're beholden to be able to share what they are legally compliant and required to do.
Gotcha. All right, next question. If you are currently consulting and you're offered a role in-house, can you negotiate to still keep consulting?
Of course. Yeah,
Right.
absolutely. Yeah, that's absolutely negotiable. You just have to be able to speak to the reason why and what advantages you see for them, not necessarily for you. What advantages do you see for them in terms of you being able to still contribute at the same level, if not more, as a consultant than coming in-house? But absolutely, I think that's absolutely something to broker, and that if you are consulting, you should try to always, again, hold on to your brand. Just be mindful of the time. Like, you might be signing up for an organization where even though you're a consultant, you're not allowed to consult for anybody else but that particular brand while you work for them. So in those situations, it turns out to be a little bit null and void. So just be mindful and make sure you are well versed and aware of like what the stipulations and limitations are if you're consulting for a particular institution, even if you're not an internal employee.
Got it. How do you negotiate salary with a promotion? Is there a standard percentage increase that should be expected?
So I think it's going to vary job to job, industry to industry, company to company. So it's hard to give you like a hard set number because, you know, promotions are performance driven, right? So that is all going to be based on your performance going into that position. Now, to sort of like bring in the question of the previous attendee, that might be an opportunity as an internal employee to have that conversation. Hey, can I get an understanding of like historically what has been our cadence, you know, as an organization in terms of what the percentage increase is when we are promoting employees from an individual contributor role to a management role, right? So I think taking that question once you're an internal employee and using that line of questioning for the promotion conversations is probably more appropriate, because then you can hold your institution to the carpet and sort of like, what's the cadence? And I want to set precedent, right? Like, I don't want you to just give me what you've done everybody else, because I've done the research and I know that most of us are underpaid. So that information helps me put my case together of what I think is appropriate for me. And if that means we have to set a precedent here, I'm totally fine with that. But it just gives you additional information to be able to have that conversation.
Got it. How important is it to have the offer in writing on an official document versus verbal or in email?
I go back and forth on this. Most companies they want a verbal offer, and that's totally normal. And I wouldn't be afraid to accept a verbal offer. Just know that you're not accepting anything until you've seen it in writing and you've had ideally the opportunity someone legal in your network to read that through and through and make sure that they know what you're signing. And that, you know, you're not really committing to anything until you've signed it. So don't be afraid to verbally accept, because until you sign that piece of paper, you have every right to change your mind. Again, you have every right to be like, you know what, I thought about this again and I'm not ready to do this for whatever reason. Let's have another conversation. I know that I did that recently. Like, I had committed to something verbally, and then once I got the paperwork and thought about it a couple more days, I was like, this still doesn't work for me, right? So yes, it's okay to accept verbally, but know that until everything is signed and you are all set, then you haven't committed to anything.
Gotcha. So, you know, people are asking if this will be available after this session. Yes, it will be available on YouTube, on the UL Jobs Network YouTube channel. So you can check that out, and all of the Digital Career Success Series episodes on that feed, UL Job Network on YouTube. All right, I have another question for you. Please address getting salary increases. Wow, interesting question. Please address getting salary increases for your staff, the people that report to you.
I mean, listen, I think the most important thing about being a leader and managing a team is like your advocacy for them, right? And being able to manage up as well as managing down, being a coach and teaching them how to advocate for themselves, right? So you don't have to be a lone soldier in this where you're now like, okay, I have 5 people and I want to get them all promoted or I want to increase their salaries and I'm sort of doing this on my own. Have them help you, right? So teach them the skill because you're not always going to be around to be the one to help them advocate for themselves, right? So we're all our individual and our own brand. They need to come to you, correct, to say this, you know, I feel that I'm prepared for the next step. And these are the reasons why. And then you can say, perfect, I agree with you, and let's work on that together, versus you feeling like you have to take that entire ownership as a leader to make that happen for them, because that doesn't help them in the long run, right? You having their back and advocating for them without teaching them how to do it for themselves is not a sustainable practice.
Gotcha. How do you negotiate salary when there is a range that is impacted by union contracts?
Ooh, that's a great question. I don't know enough about unions and how much you can break them or go beyond them. In my sort of like private sector experience, there's always exceptions to every rule. So I'm going to assume that that's the case with potential, you know, government or union positions as well. But I don't want to lie and act like I'm well versed in that. So I would just urge you to do, you know, more research on that particular area, you know, to see if there's other implications that I'm not familiar with. But my understanding is like there's always exceptions to every rule. I've seen hiring managers, companies, you know, go beyond the band because that's the person that they want for the job. I've seen it happen time and time again. Yes, it's a conundrum. It's a ton of approval processes. You have to like, again, basically write a dissertation to be able to do it and sort of have a more premium offer. But it does exist and it does happen. So don't be limited by whatever number you've been provided.
Okay, this is probably going to be our last question here. Do you have an example of a candidate that negotiated his or her salary effectively? What made him or her stand out?
Yeah. So I've had a lot of candidates that do it really, really well and have taught me how to do it well. I think now I'm also that candidate, right? Like I'm really proud of myself again for the first time, like almost 20 years into my career, 40 years old. Like TikTok is probably the first offer negotiation where I walked away from that conversation like, yeah, I got this. Like I really, you know, I really advocated for myself, and I do this for a living. So again, like this isn't easy by any means. But I think it's a combination of just like, actually, I'm gonna pull some things from a recent salary negotiation webinar that I attended, right? Because as I said, I'm a practitioner, not an expert, so I'm always learning myself. But Felicia Butterfield Jones, who I used to work with at Google, and Letitia Bird recently did a bomb, you know, presentation around all of this. And, you know, some key elements that I pulled away from that I think answer this question a little bit is, right, like no servitude posture, no gratitude posture, just like being able to come in with confidence and clarity and control, right? Negotiation is a conversation. It's not a confrontation. This is not meant to be a confrontational conversation. This is not meant to be, it can be uncomfortable, but if you put yourself at ease, then you put the other person at ease, especially if you lead with, listen, I really want this job. I want to make this work for both of us. But there are certain pieces of this that I think we need to reconsider and reevaluate. So just if they understand that you're not on the defensive, you're not against them, you're in this together. Again, leading with that clarity, that confidence, that control, and having a mutual conversation that is not riddled in any negativity, I think is probably the best advice that I would give, and the things that really resonated from me listening to Letitia and Felicia, didn't realize their names rhymed until right now. And then just be really mindful of your language, right? Like, my expectation is this. And thinking around, you know, how you're using language in that conversation, and really articulating your value. Just, again, this isn't personal. This is not personal. And I mean, it's deeply personal because it impacts your entire livelihood and your family's livelihood. But the conversation, the outcome is personal. The conversation is not personal, it's business. And you want to be able to have a professional, grounded, data-driven, metrics, market research, intelligence, true understanding of your value and worth conversation that ultimately leads to them, first of all, having a greater appreciation of who you really are, having real respect, like, man, this person is like, really knows their worth and what they bring to the table. And you want that recruiter or that hiring manager to show you that they recognize who you are and what you bring to the table, and that they're going to meet you where you want to be.
Well, you know, we have such an amazing community, practitioners, right, in the DEI space. I was just on a panel with Letitia on Monday.
Oh, I love it.
Entrepreneur Media, yeah, Racism at Work. She's amazing. I'm going to have to get information and see if that session that you were on is available. Listen, speaking of amazing communities, I want to thank everyone for tuning in today on the Urban League Jobs Network Digital Career Success Series. Gisselle, I want to thank you for delivering an impactful, amazing conversation on the art of negotiation. Thank you so very much. You're the real deal. I love it. I love it. So on behalf of Wanda Jackson, Theveline Felix, and new intern, Mika Austin, I'd like to welcome everybody back August 5th, when we'll talk about navigating virtual bias. Attendees will learn how to manage the ageism bias that comes in the virtual workforce. That's going to be an amazing one as well. My name's Kenneth L. Johnson, host of the Digital Career Success Series. It's been a great session today. Gisselle, again, thank you so very much. And to everybody that attended, thank you. The questions were great, and I hope we can see you again on August 5th. Take care.
Stay blessed.